Hello again and welcome back to our course on Access 2013 Advanced. In this section we're going to take a look at joins. You will have used joins before if you've created anything other than the very simplest queries. But I want to look at joins here in quite a bit more detail, and in particular I want to look at how they look within SQL statements as well as how they look using the query grid in Access 2013. In order to demonstrate joins in Access 2013, what I've done here in the student database is to create a new table, a state table. And in that state table I've started to put the states of the USA, but I haven't put all of them in. I've got 14 of them so far, and you'll see why I haven't put them all in yet in just a moment. So let me close the state table, and what I want to do is to create a query which will give me a list of the students in the student table and the state of their home address. Now, of course, at the moment, the state for the students who are US based, which I think is all of them in this case, the state is represented by the 2-character state abbreviation. So in order to get the names, I need to use that state table. So first of all, within Design View in the Query Tools, I need to show another table. The table I'm going to show is the state table. So add that to the list. Now currently there is no relationship in this database between the student table and the state table, and what I'm going to do is to create such a relationship, and it's pretty straightforward, as I'm sure you know, because all I have to do is to choose the state province field in the student table and basically drag it over to have a relationship with the state code field in the state table. And Access 2013 creates a relationship that's represented by what is there currently a thin line between those two fields. So let's now put this query together. I'm going to take first name and last name from the student table and state name from the state table. Now if I run this query, what do you think I'm going to see? Well, let's take a look. What I get is actually quite a short list of students, and the reason that it's quite a short list is that by default the join that is created between those tables is what's called an inner join. And what I'm going to explain to you first is what an inner join is. But before we move on to that, let's just quickly look at the SQL. The SQL says, let me just move the navigation pane out of the way, select. Now of course the 3 fields we're selecting now each have to be preceded by their table name, because we've got 2 tables involved in this query. So it's first name from the student table, last name from the students table, and state name from the state table. From the student table, inner join the state table on state province in table students equals state code in table state. So what it's basically saying is I want you to join together the student table and the state table using as the principle of joining that a state province name in the student table is equal to a state code name in the state table. But do an inner join, and what an inner join means is that you will only get values selected where there is a value in both the student table and the state table. So it only works when you have an actual match. Now let me go back into Design View, and in order to see a different view of that relationship, that join, let's just double click on the line between those two, and it brings up the Join Properties dialog. So what the description of the option chosen here is, option 1, only include rows where the joined fields from both tables are equal. That's what an inner join does. Now there's a summary in the top half of this dialog. The name of the table on the left is the student table, the name of the table on the right is the state table, the column in the students table is the state province column, The column in the right hand state table is the state code column. Now we're now going to change this join to a type 2 join, and in a type 2 join we include all records from the students table and only those records from table state where joined fields are equal. So what that means is that Access will actually include all of the students, but it will only put a state name where there is a match in the state table. So let's select that second option. Let's run the query this time. And what you can see now, as I said just now, is you have all of the students' names, and where there's a match you've got the state name, and where there isn't it just leaves it empty. Let's look at what the SQL looks like in that case. The words inner join have been replaced by the words left join. And it's pretty straightforward to remember what a left join is, because you've got the name of the table on the left, the student table, and the one on the right, the state table. And subject to whatever other where clauses, constraints, conditions are put on there, basically what it means is that every qualifying student is listed, and if they don't have a state code, or if their state code does not have a corresponding entry in the state table, all that will happen is that the state name will be left blank. So you'll see all of the qualifying students, but some of them may have their state name blank. Whereas with an inner join you would only see the students if there was a corresponding state name in the state table. So that is a left join. There is one other option, and you can probably guess that there isn't going to be a prize for guessing what the third option is. So back into design view, I'm looking at the join properties dialog again. Let's choose option 3, click on OK, and run the query. Now this time, of course, you have a full list of the state names on the right. Some states have no representative students. Interestingly, where a state within the list of 14 that I set up does have students, if there's more than one student, then you'll get an entry for that state for each student. So for instance, there are 2 entries for California, 4 for Connecticut, and so on. Now that's a right join. If you have a look at the SQL, you could probably even, I hope, guess what it says. It's the student table right join the state table. In this case, you get all of the states, and you'll get students where they have a state code that is in the state table, and therefore if they've got a state code in the state table, they'll have a state name in the state table as well. So that is a right join. Now strictly speaking, in the language of SQL, a left join should be referred to as a left outer join, and a right join should be referred to as a right outer join. So having looked at the basic and essential features of joins, let's now look at a more complex example, because very often when you're putting together queries in Access 2013, you'll be involving more than 2 tables. And when you involve more than 2 tables, sometimes you have to do things in a slightly different way in order to achieve the desired effect. So what I'm going to do now is to try to put together a query which lists all of the students and their guardians. So I'm going to go into the query design grid. I'm going to put students and students and guardians tables on there. And what I want to do is to show the student's first name, the student's last name, and then I want the guardian ID and the guardian first name and last name. Now bear in mind that in this database sometimes the guardians are company guardians, they are organizations as opposed to individuals. So let's see what we get if we try to run that query. Now it seems to work absolutely fine because we've got 35 entries and We've got one corporate one there, Sven Anderson. Guardian is an organisation called Somerville House. But there is something masked in this which we need to look at. So what I'm going to do now, just to emphasise the point, is to go back into Design View again, and I'm going to do an order by student last names. So I'm going to sort on that field ascending. And now let me run the query again. Again, everything seems fine. But note that Tom Perkins has actually got 2 guardians, and the total number of entries we've got is 35. So somebody, one of the students, is not in the list. And the problem we've got here is that effectively we've got an inner join by default. So what we need to do is to basically make sure we get all the students in this list, whether or not they have guardians. Now that sounds as though it's going to be a pretty straightforward thing to do, but a lot of people have trouble with this in Access, and it's very necessary really to understand what's going on. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back into the design of this query just for a moment, and I'm going to remove the Guardians table for now. And I'm going to look at what happens if I run the query. There, I've got 35, but of course Perkins is in there twice. You should be able to work out that if I go into Design View and double click on the join, I want all the students, so it needs to be a left join. Click on OK, run the query again, and now what I get is 36, because Harry Smith, the one who doesn't have a guardian at the moment on the database, is the student who was missing from the list. Okay, well that all seems pretty straightforward, doesn't it? We've found the main problem, so maybe we can now go back into Design View, re-add the Guardians table, and all will be well. So let's now try and run the query. Watch what happens. Rather than all being well, we get an error message that you'll probably see quite a bit in Access. The SQL statement could not be executed because it contains ambiguous outer joins. Now, ambiguous outer joins means that basically when you put these 3 tables into the query grid and ask Access to make a query out of them, it's effectively chosen a sequence which makes the query ambiguous. Now there are basically 2 ways around this. One of them is to use the approach that it says there in the error message. Unfortunately you can't read all of the error message, but basically what it's saying is do a subquery first and then use the query as input to a second query. Now we're not covering subqueries on this course, so that is an option that's open to us. But the option it doesn't mention is to look into what's going on there and see if we can fix it without resorting to a subquery. So logically, if we look at the join between the student table and the student and guardian table, the one we changed a little while ago to being a left outer join, that still seems to be the right thing to do because you want all of the students whether or not we have recorded guardians, so that has to be right. The other join from the students and guardians table to the guardians table is the one that's causing the problem. Now of course it also has defaulted to an inner join. And the problem is that we have empty entries in the students and guardians table and therefore no corresponding entries in guardians. Now which of the 3 options for a join would allow us to have empty entries at the students and guardians end of the join? And that of course would be a right join. So let me change that now to being a right join. Let's not forget that we need names from the guardians table, first name, last name. So I've changed that to a right join, which means that we're quite happy to have empty entries here in the students and guardians table because this join can now cope with empty entries on the left because it's a right join. Let's try running it now. Now if we run it, you can see Sven Anderson there, whose guardian is the corporate guardian Somerville House, is fine. And if we go down to Harry Smith, we can see that Harry Smith has no guardian at all. But there's absolutely no problem. The query has worked perfectly well with that adaptation to what is done by default in Access 2013. That's it for this section on joins, other than to give you another exercise to do. Pretty straightforward. Take version 12 of the movies database. In my answer to this exercise, the query is called query movie genre with an S on the end, and it's in version 13 of the database, and it's basically a straightforward query. Movie title, year of release, and then genre for each of the movies. Note that the movies in this particular query occur repeated number of times, once each for each genre for the movie. And obviously, if you were going to actually present the results of this query in a form or a report, you deal with those repetitions. But the most important thing to note, of course, is that it also copes perfectly well with the movies in the database where we don't currently have recorded genre. You may want to add a few genre records yourself as well, just to test it out thoroughly, but that's it. My answer, as I say, is example 13. That's it for this section. I'll see you in the next one.